lies a life shaped by storms few could imagine. At 71, the struggles he has faced aren't just career setbacks, they cut deeper, into family, loss, and the private battles no headline can capture. What truly happened behind the lights and fame? The answer is as heartbreaking as it is unseen. A childhood stolen by stardom. Ron Howard's story begins not in Hollywood, but in Duncan, Oklahoma, a place of ordinary rhythms and modest dreams. Yet, from the very start, his life was anything but ordinary. Born to working actors Rance and Gene Howard, his earliest days were already entangled with the unpredictable pulse of show business. Lullabies and playtime were replaced by call sheets and studio lights. By 18 months, cameras were waiting, sets were waiting, and a world hungry for innocence had already claimed him. His first steps didn't land on soft earth, they fell on cold studio floors, under lights too bright for a child to understand. The Howards moved to California in the mid-1950s, chasing opportunity and a future in television. But the promise of Hollywood came with a price. Ron's schooling was a mix of cramped trailers and hurried lessons, often drowned out by the clatter of equipment and the haze of cigarette smoke. Childhood, with its simple joys, was swallowed by the chaos of adult worlds. Crew members argued, props swayed under careless hands, and he learned lessons far too early about disappointment and responsibility. By age 6, he was stepping into the shoes of Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show. America adored him, but the reality behind the camera was starkly different. On set, Ron studied arithmetic while grips shouted over the clatter of equipment. There were no recess bells, no baseball games, no laughter echoing through yards, just the hum of production and the weight of expectations. Though he smiled for the cameras, loneliness trailed him home. Outside the studio, childhood cruelty followed. Classmates twisted his name into mocking rhymes. At times, humiliation struck so sharply he could barely face a school bathroom. At 8, filming The Music Man, he froze mid-performance, whispering to Shirley Jones, "I can't do it," terrified of failing the adults whose approval felt like air. Yet even in these early struggles, Ron began forging resilience. Every long, silent lunch behind a set, every cruel joke, and every moment of fear became part of the armor he would later carry into life and career. The golden cage of fame confined him, but also taught him endurance. By adolescence, his face was already immortalized on television, yet his identity felt trapped behind the image of Opie Taylor. While other boys navigated awkward crushes and first experiments in independence, Ron faced an industry that demanded he remain frozen in time. Even as the applause rained down, the private ache remained. He learned early that fame was not freedom, it was a responsibility, a spotlight that could blind even as it illuminated. It was in these early pressures and compromises that the seeds of a deeper struggle began to take root, a struggle that would define how he understood himself and the world around him. The weight of fame and lost identity. By the time Ron Howard entered his teenage years, the world already knew his face, his smile, and even his voice. From Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show to early film roles, his identity had become inseparable from the characters he portrayed. But behind the bright lights and adoring fans, a quieter struggle was unfolding. Fame, which seemed like a blessing, was also a prison, a weight pressing down on a young boy who had barely had the chance to grow on his own terms. Teenhood, a time meant for self-discovery, friendships, and rebellion, was instead measured in ratings, scripts, and studio expectations. While other teens navigated the complexities of identity, Ron faced constant scrutiny. Every mistake, every hesitation on set, was noted by the production crew and the nation alike. The applause that greeted him at premieres and on television sets masked an inner conflict. He was Ron Howard, yet he was also Opie, and the two were increasingly indistinguishable to the public. The distinction between the boy and the character became blurred, leaving him unsure of who he really was. The social scene outside of Hollywood did not provide any shelter. His mates just knew him as the kid on the TV, and not as a friend or a fellow student. The efforts to get closer to other people were frequently met by mimes or mockery. Very few times were there when they had private moments talking with friends, experimenting with hobbies, or just goofing around. the boy's self-image got fractured little by little in that continuous masquerade of the agent giving his best with every conversation and every smile when he was going through the hard times. To make things even worse, the entertainment world set a really high standard. Ron had to do perfect acting every time he was needed, bear the direction of the adults who were much older and smarter, and keep up a public image that was always agreeable, pure, and charming. Any departure from this picture was met with criticism or disappointment. He tried so hard to make the world happy that it turned out he could not even be in contact with his needs, wants, and dreams anymore. The kid who used to easily and freely dance between the boundaries of reality and fantasy was now constantly measuring his moves. However, during this testing time, a subtle strength appeared. Ron started to notice, to know, and to take in the teachings not only about acting, but also about living, human interactions, and the influence of storytelling. He found out that the very celebrity that confined him also gave him the necessary tools, a comprehension of plot, feeling, and audience connection, that would eventually let him determine his fate behind the camera. The difficulty was to take back his whole self from the role which had been thrust upon him, a job which needed time, bravery, and constant self-examination. The distinction was drawn at the time of adolescence. The public recognized Opie Taylor, an image of purity and happiness, while the boy underneath was Ron Howard, who was dealing with the complicated, sometimes painful, side of a life that was marked by fame. It was from this tension between imposed image and inner self that he would find the spark to transform not only his career but his identity entirely. Triumphs behind the camera. As Ron Howard transitioned from child actor to adult, the world expected him to fade into obscurity like many of his peers. Yet, he quietly began a transformation that few could have predicted. Moving behind the camera, Ron discovered a new realm where he could reclaim control, explore creativity, and finally define himself on his own terms. Directing became not just a career shift, but a lifeline, a space where his identity, talent, and ambition could thrive without the constraints of a public persona built decades earlier. Howard's early steps into directing were deliberate yet daring. He chose projects that allowed him to experiment and learn, often taking on smaller films that carried big risks. Unlike acting, directing gave him authority over storytelling, the power to shape narratives, and the chance to work with actors not as a peer or former child star, but as a mentor. It was here that he began to transform the pressure of fame into discipline and vision. He studied scripts with the same intensity he once applied to memorizing lines, but now he considered the broader story, the emotional arc, and the audience's perspective. In this role, he discovered a new kind of validation, not applause from viewers for a familiar face, but respect for his skill, leadership, and insight. Each successful project was a quiet victory, proof that his talent extended far beyond acting. Breakthroughs came steadily. Films like Apollo 13 and A Beautiful Mind were not just critical and commercial successes, they were statements. They announced that Ron Howard had moved from a beloved child actor to a visionary filmmaker capable of commanding Hollywood's most challenging stories. The triumphs behind the camera were not just about accolades or box office numbers, they were a reclamation of self. For the first time, Howard's identity was defined by his choices, his vision, and his craft, rather than the characters the world had assigned him as a child. Yet, this transition wasn't without struggle. The shadow of his past fame lingered, and Hollywood often underestimated him, seeing him as the former Opie rather than a serious director. Each success required persistence, courage, and a willingness to confront skepticism. Over time, however, Ron demonstrated that experience, insight, and dedication could eclipse typecasting, reshaping both his career and his reputation. In moving behind the camera, Ron Howard transformed the limitations of childhood fame into a powerful asset. The boy who once felt trapped by the weight of public expectation now orchestrated entire worlds on screen, proving that reinvention is possible, even after a life lived under the unrelenting gaze of fame. But even the greatest professional triumphs could not shield him from the heartbreaks life would inevitably bring. Heartbreaks and no money can fix, no amount of fame, accolades, or fortune can shield anyone from life's deepest pains, and Ron Howard's story is proof of that. Behind the carefully curated smiles and professional triumphs, some heartbreaks struck far beyond the reach of Hollywood's lights. Despite his remarkable career, Howard faced moments of personal loss and emotional upheaval that money simply couldn't repair, moments that reminded him, and the world, that fame does not equate to immunity from suffering. One of the earliest shocks came in the form of strained relationships. The pressures of growing up in the public eye had left marks that lingered long after the cameras were turned off. Friendships frayed, romantic connections faltered, and the isolation that accompanies long-term fame began to take its toll. Even surrounded by colleagues, collaborators, and fans, Howard often confronted an acute loneliness. The realization that not every problem could be solved with influence or resources was a stark contrast to the illusion of control he once believed he had as a child star. Family misfortunes brought yet another layer of sorrow. Howard has candidly admitted that, despite being successful and rich, the emotional burden of losing friends or seeing their hardships cannot be balanced by prize or salary. These instances unfolded the truth: some sorrows last forever, and the traces they cause are not seen by others. Hollywood could identify his tragedy, but it could not shield him from sadness, discouragement, or the gradual diminishing of hope that comes with personal loss. Even involuntary professional losses were associated with a special kind of sorrow. Sometimes, projects to which Howard devoted his heart lost, not because of a lack of talent but because of reasons beyond his control. While the world may look at box office scores or read reviews, the personal input, working for long hours, putting in emotional energy, and making sacrifices, remains mostly unrecognized. Such losses are reminders that victory in Hollywood, just like in life, is never assured, and even exploits like extraordinary talents do not mark one's invincibility. However, amidst the agony of love lost, Howard discovered strength. He turned each instance of suffering into a teaching, a power that molded his compassion, his decisions, and his creativity. He figured out that there are some conflicts that money can't purchase a solution, trading in and going through them is the only way out. And thus, he was not hardened but brought closer to the core of humanity, a person who knows that the greatest tragedies of existence are still outside the volcano of celebrity. At the end of the day, even a person like Ron Howard, dear, gifted, and affluent, still has to go through the inevitable trials of life. These hardships let it be known that under the flashy and dazzling appearance, ordinary people suffer, lose, and fear unmasking just like everybody else. And yet, even these lessons could not prepare him for the heartbreak that comes with losing the people closest to his heart. The pain of losing loved ones even amidst the glitz, glamour, and applause, life has a way of delivering the harshest lessons in the form of loss. For Ron Howard, no achievement, award, or milestone could shield him from the profound grief that comes with losing those closest to the heart. The pain of losing loved ones is an experience that spares no one, not even Hollywood legends, and Howard's journey offers a stark, deeply human perspective on the fragility of life. As a child star, Howard grew up surrounded by fans, lights, and recognition, but the protective bubble of fame could not insulate him from personal tragedies. Over the years, he has faced the heartbreak of losing people who played pivotal roles in his life, family, friends, and mentors whose absence left voids impossible to fill. Each loss carried its own weight, a reminder that life's most valuable connections cannot be replaced, no matter the wealth or status one accumulates. The intensity of such grief is magnified when it involves family. Howard has spoken candidly about the moments when loved ones passed unexpectedly or when circumstances prevented him from being fully present during their final days. These experiences left deep emotional scars, underscoring a painful truth: time is finite, and no career milestone or public accolade can make up for missed opportunities to say goodbye or offer comfort. Even surrounded by support and understanding, the sense of loss remains intensely personal and enduring. Friendships and close professional relationships, too, were not immune to life's cruel turns. In Hollywood, bonds often form quickly and deeply, but when tragedy strikes, the impact is just as real as in any ordinary life. Howard had to navigate the grief of losing individuals who influenced his career and personal growth, learning the hard way that fame cannot guarantee the preservation of meaningful human connections. Through these painful experiences, Howard's perspective on life and success evolved. He recognized that the true measure of a person lies not in the awards on their shelf, but in the love they give and receive, and in the memories shared with those who matter most. The loss of loved ones, while heartbreaking, also instilled in him a profound empathy and a sense of urgency to cherish every moment with the people who remain. This side of Ron Howard, rarely seen by the public,